Welcome to the Beatles, the podcast about the Beatles, everything about the Beatles 24/8. I'm Allison.
And I'm Erica. And before we start, be sure to subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts or stream us on Spotify. And if you're enjoying BC the Beatles, feel free to leave us a preferably 5-star review so other Beatlemaniacs can find us.
Also, don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We'll be posting videos, photos, and more from this episode and beyond. And you can also email us, always email us at bcthebeatles@gmail.com.
Well, hey.
Hi.
Hi. It's been a minute.
Hello. It's been a hot minute, yes. We're back. I feel like we started a few episodes like this, but this might be the longest hiatus we've had, I think. So
Definitely.
far.
About 6 months, I think.
Yeah, we took a nice chunk of time off.
But we're back, and we just wanted to kind of chat with everybody about where we've been and, a couple of things that we've been thinking of while we've been on hiatus.
So I think our last episode was March-ish, right,
Yes.
with Christine. And as you guys, if you think back to March, I know this year has been absolutely crazy. I can't believe it's already September. But there was a lot going on in March, and we're going to talk about that. But the one thing that we had planned to talk about before we went on hiatus was Ringo's EP, Zoom In. We do take the piss out of Ringo quite a bit in the show, but my fault because, I have my issues with Ringo. But we were going to talk about the EP. We had listened to the EP. We were ready to talk about it. But honestly, to be 100% transparent with you guys, we just honestly didn't feel like talking about Ringo's EP.
And that wasn't just you and your Ringo issues. We had both listened to it. We both made notes. We both planned to record and discuss it. And, it was just one of those things that it didn't spark the joy, as Marie Kondo would say. And so we couldn't get there.
I think that's a really, really good way to put it. Plus, I feel like almost, and by the way, Erica, I don't know if you probably know this, but Ringo's coming out with another EP in a few weeks.
Which we are saying now, we're probably not going to talk about it on this show.
Probably not. We might mention it, but probably not. We're going to go deep into it. But anyway, so on top of the EP in March, there was so much happening in the Beatles world at the same time. So there was Ringo's EP. Same time as it came out, McCartney 3 Imagined came out, which, to be fair, we both liked that quite a bit more.
And there was a lot of hype around it, too. Paul was doing Instagram Live. There was just so much going on.
I think we both talked about maybe privately The Kiss of Venus. We were like, oh, this is such a great track. It came out a little bit earlier. The thing I did not like, Erica, I need to mention real quick, is that deep fake Paul video.
I can't handle that.
I hate it.
Broke my brain. I
Kill
hated
it with fire.
Oh my
Kill
God.
It with fire. I wish I could unsee that shit. Honestly, that was uncalled for. Not okay.
I hate it. It created a new circle of hell. It's just no.
It's bad. I can't think about it for too long. Anyway,
it's in that same land of hologram Elvis. It just goes there, and I don't like it.
Dude, there's a guy on TikTok who does a deep fake Elvis, and I hate deep fake. I don't like this. It seems evil to me. It might be the future. I hope it's not.
I don't know. It just feels like it can be used for such nefarious political purposes that using it for entertainment is just the gateway into really bad things.
I mean, it could go so far down the rabbit hole. It's not, just stop it, guys. No more deep fake, especially this Beck video. Oh my God, awful. Don't do it again, please. We beg you. So all that was happening. Plus, that same month, it was within a week or two, all this stuff happened. The big Plastic Ono box came out, which I love that album. I was really excited for the stuff. I listened to it. It's awesome. But it was just another thing that came out.
We planned to talk about that in one of our episodes, and we just never got there. And then to pile on, then Linda's new cookbook came out. Then the All Things Must Pass box set. And by the time the new Paul McCartney Who Is Special came out last month, we were just totally underwater and unable to catch up.
Yeah, there were times, truthfully, and Eric and I talked the other day about this. It's I felt so guilty personally for not covering this stuff. And I was just but it kept mounting to the point where I didn't want to text Erica and be should we cover this? Because it was just so much. It was so much.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just easier to stick your head in the sand and avoid those conversations. Yay!
Absolutely. Because it was just a lot of stuff. So Everything just felt very overwhelming, and it was impossible to keep up with it. And, like, yeah. So all this suffice to say is, what we're leading to is all the news in the Beatles world. We sort of need to focus on what we actually care about. And, if we don't feel like covering Ringo's EP, we're frankly just not going to do it.
And you know what? That's fine. There's a Ringo podcast now. There's a lot of podcasts, which we'll get to in a bit.
No, for real. Like, there are people who do it better than we ever could do to like go in deep about these releases and all that. It's like, that's just not our bag. And it never has been. But, we'll certainly talk about things that interest us, but that's just not, our brains can't handle trying to keep up with everything all the time.
Nope. And another thing that happened over the last couple of months was a real mounting of sexism and trolling and nastiness happening around female fronted Beatles podcasts and generally female Beatles content creators. Part of the reason we started this podcast was that there was such a lack of female representation in this world. I mean, despite the huge impact that women have had on the Beatles and on this community. I mean, if you look at the lineage of Beatles authors, starting with Hunter Davies, going through Nicholas Schaffner in the 70s, and straight up to Mark Lewison, I mean, it's all men who were, the top 10, top 25 Beatles authors that people think of. This is despite the fact that there are so many female Beatles historians out there, and there always have been.
Absolutely. Like, how many times does, somebody like Jude Kessler, who has written who is still writing her John Lennon series? I mean, it's so comprehensive, it blows my brain. It gets passed over for people like Mark Lewison, which I'm not saying it's good or bad, but definitely the women in this world should be mentioned in the same context as some of the men, for sure.
Exactly. And the women really cornered a very important aspect of the Beatles' history and the sociological impact of the Beatles, which was the impact on the Beatles fan community. A lot of the most important studies of the fandom have really come from female writers that have documented their own fan experience and that of their peers and of other people around the world. And unfortunately, around 1967, when Beatles scholarship sort of went from something that women, and especially young women, were very keen on reporting to something that became more of a serious historical topic. And at that point, women and the topics that women were focusing on were relegated to the background.
Yeah, I mean, that goes hand in glove with just the whole teeny bopper movement. Rob Sheffield, our friend Rob Sheffield, talks about this a lot, where it's like teenage girls always have know the coolest stuff, but people are quick to sort of like put women in the background and write them off as, oh, they just like that because the boys are cute. They can't be serious about this. And even though, women had a very important place, and this is getting into a whole other world that we should probably get into at some point, but, even in rock journalism in the 60s, but it was very easy for those women to be passed over in favor of male journalists just because they were, heterosexual women, like basically. So, it was easy for that research to sort of go undiscovered.
With the dawning of the internet and when we both got into the fandom as second generation fans, there's been a slight gender rebalancing, especially we've been to fests and different panels over the years. And we felt a real need to make a contribution as well to even out that balance. And getting back to what our issue was, of course we knew that as female historians in this space, we would be critiqued for everything from the topics we cover to, the sound of our voices in a way our male counterparts are never, ever subjected to.
Shout out to the guy who wrote the negative Apple podcast review about me sounding like a Valley girl.
Yeah, that's lovely. And I also like to highlight the lovely gentleman who called us chatty and catty.
Catty, yes, I love that. I'm gonna get that like a tattoo, like hashtag chatty and catty.
I love it. And I'd love to see a male-led podcast in any genre critiqued as chatty or catty. We started this podcast in 2018, and for the first couple of years, it was totally fine. Yes, we got our share of comments and reviews we just talked about, but it didn't matter because we got such a positive reception from listeners of all genders, and we really did feel like we were making a difference.
as we'll get into in a second, we felt like we really did sort of bridge that gap a little bit, or at least kind of try to like break it down a bit so other people could feel welcome to make their own voices heard in this space that was so dominated by men, helping women and female identifying people come on in and talk about the Beatles. And it exploded. It was crazy. And now there are so many women, and it's amazing. There's so many women in the space contributing everything from scholarly books to podcasts to Beatles YouTube channels and TikTok accounts. It's no longer like this novelty sort of dark corner of the Beatles world. That's what we kind of always intended.
There's enough of us that it's meaningful now. But with that meaningfulness and that larger number, there's come a new wave of vitriol from people who, I don't know, seem to take offense to our existing in this space in a way that's a bit more trollish and gendered more often than it used to, often taking the form of a butthurt man who resorts to lowest common denominator trolling.
Like, not even trolling just to troll against podcasts, but, we've had people on Twitter try to like pit us against other female podcasts, like Another Kind of Mind, which is insane because why would we take that bait?
Because we're so catty. We're so catty.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. Oh, I totally forgot that we're very catty.
Yes.
That's right. Okay.
Yes.
Never mind. Makes sense.
And let me just say, this is not a big revelation to any woman who has ever tried to make her voice heard on the internet. This happens all the time. This happens a lot worse to a lot of other people. And we do our best to swiftly and happily take down trolls who try and sully our socials with this bullshit. If you see it, it's only because we've shared it and we've shared our comments and then we've deleted it. But we've got to admit, it's taken some of the joy out of what we came here to do, which was celebrate the life-changing music of the Beatles. And, we're not in it for the money and the fame. We're in it for the joy.
I'm still waiting on the money and the fame.
Okay, you keep waiting.
Yeah.
Podcasting is a labor of love. Let's put it that way. And that's okay. But
yes.
it's especially demoralizing when, we're part of women's Beatles communities and we hear over and over again about fellow female content creators having to waste their time dealing with trolls, or somebody made, some nasty video about them on YouTube. Like, what the fuck? And it's just, I don't know what to say about it. I mean, on one hand, I know that people should be out there, continue to do their thing, keep fighting the fight. It's important to represent everywhere. But on the other hand, this really is for joy.
Yeah. And, just to also springboard off of that, we're not saying we don't welcome critique. We absolutely do. We are always looking to be better at whatever it is we're doing, whether it's podcasting, whether it's, writing articles or social media, like anything. But this is to be like an asshole, just to be an asshole on the internet, not because of what we're saying, how we're saying it, anything like that, but just because we're women who happen to talk about the Beatles in a public forum. Like, if it's valid critique, please let us know. That's why we give our email address.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to hear from you, and we want to have discussions about the things that we bring up because we're interested in it, and we know that our opinion is not the only opinion. But, let's keep it cool. Let's keep it civil.
Yeah, absolutely. So, with all of this in mind, something that Eric and I have had multiple conversations about over the hiatus is like a huge question. It's, what the hell are we even doing?
Right.
The podcast. There, again, like I said, with a Beatles podcast, there's so much pressure to stay on top of everything. All the releases, which you would think that would be so easy because this band has been broken up for 50 fucking years.
I know.
What could there be new to talk about? Well, the Beatles are, as you all know, we're not saying anything that is surprising to you, but there's so much that comes out. There's so much to deal with the Beatles that just, rolls out all the time. So it is hard to sort of like stay like on the up and up there. As we said before, there's a lot of Beatles podcasts out. There's a lot of YouTube channels. There's a lot of people who do unboxings or try to like give you advanced looks at releases or the music that comes, the demos, whatever. So it's like very hard to devote the brain power that is needed to kind of like stay with that.
everybody started a Beatles podcast during quarantine, and that
So
is
many.
amazing. I
Yeah.
love it when people start following us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and like a new Beatles podcast with a new perspective.
And like every day, guys, I'm not joking. Like every day I look down on my phone and there's a Twitter notification. It's like such and such Beatles podcast just started following you. And I'm like, what the hell? Another one? It's crazy. It's like I've got to like have more hours in the day so I can listen to
I
all the Beatles
know.
podcasts.
And they all have something to say that's new, which is amazing. I mean, some of them are really well structured, like our friends over at Blotto Beatles or Ranking the Beatles.
Ugh, the Blotto Beatles. I can't think about that evening because I don't remember it very well.
I remember the Fireball.
Oh God. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, but yes, we love them, and they do definitely do have their, their own sort of format, their own angle. And of course, there are more women here too. We mentioned Another Kind of Mind, who also, are connected with the One Sweet Dream podcast, to Kid O'Toole and her bunch on Facebook that go live and do sort of a podcast thing, to our girl Caitlin, who's on YouTube, to, there's so many other women giving it to the masses as far as the Beatles go.
This is wonderful and this is what we wanted, but our niche of creating a female fronted Beatles podcast, it's not really a niche anymore. We are starting to think about who we are as we go into this like next stage of Beatles podcasting. It's not that special anymore to be a female fronted podcast, which is amazing.
Yeah. And we keep saying it's amazing, but it is because it's actually shocking. I remember when we started, it was like, Screw It. Screw It was a huge influence on us. And it's still, whenever they release an episode every so often, it's great.
I know.
We still need to have Will come on here. That would be awesome.
Yes.
And then, for your higher brow Beatles podcast, it's like something about the Beatles, Richard Buston, like that kind of thing. And then we sort of came along. We're like, hey guys, new kid on the block, what's up? and, and now it's like just exploded. We do genuinely love it because there is so much to enjoy. Any Beatles fan would. This is an embarrassment of riches for all of us.
We're thinking about a lot of questions about what should this podcast be? Do we need a format? Do we need a new niche? Do we need to be broader? Do we need to be more narrow? What is it that we need to say?
Yeah, these big life questions that we all ask ourselves about our podcast
Of course.
once in a while. But like the important part is that we're not quitting. Like we did take time off, but we're not quitting. On the contrary, we're very proud to fit around as long as we have for about 3 years now,
Yeah,
right?
more than
Yeah,
that.
and oh gosh. Okay, well, that's insane to me. And we have awesome listeners who do reach out to us. I think I owe a lot of people emails, actually, sorry. And our friends who we've made through the podcast. We're so grateful for all of you guys, for your support, for your kind words, for everything. We truly do have some pretty exciting shit in the works.
I feel like this time off has given us a new perspective and some new energy about what we want to do next. But we create this podcast as a vehicle to communicate with the wider Beatles audience. So we want to know what you want to hear from us.
Yeah. And we have covered topics in the past that have been emailed to us or have been suggested to us by friends or listeners. So please, bcthebeatles@gmail.com or shoot us a DM. We would love to hear what you would like us to talk about.
Most definitely.
So, in thinking about our hiatus and coming back from our hiatus, one thing that we thought about in the Beatles world, because, this is still a Beatles podcast. So, after our top of the show airing of The Room, we want to talk about the most famous Beatles hiatus, which is when John Lennon took some time off in the late 70s to become a house husband and bake bread. The question that I was curious about is, and we all have sort of an idea of why, but why did he actually, take some time off? So John formally took time off in 1977, although a lot of people sort of correctly assume that started with the birth of his son Sean in 1975. But he and Yoko did a very famous interview with Playboy in 1980, where he was directly asked by David Sheff, why did you do it? And he said, I had been under obligation or contract from the time I was 22 well into my 30s. My contract was the physical manifestation of being in prison. It was more
Yikes.
important to face myself, yeah, and face the reality than to continue a life of rock and roll, which is a huge, I mean, to hear John say that, that's a really telling thing. And he said rock and roll was simply not fun anymore. So he said, Yoko showed me the possibility of the alternative. You don't have to do this. I don't really, but. And so she, as a lot of people know, John sort of stayed home, took care of the house, took care of the baby, and Yoko went to work. She became his representative with Apple and the publishing, and did all the deals, and met with the attorneys and all that kind of thing. While John sort of just like took the time off.
Yeah, and John, not only did he find that rock and roll was not fun anymore, which is a really interesting thing. I mean, John has had so many different phases of his life, and all of it goes back to him trying to find himself and, making this decision of not being John Lennon for a little while. Like, that takes some crazy courage. And
Yeah,
I think that part of it was that he knew that he wasn't the best father to Julian. And I think having another child, he really wanted to do it right this time. John had said about this time that, Sean will be 5, and I wanted to give 5 solid years of being there all the time. I hadn't seen my first son, Julian, grow up, and now there's a 17-year-old man on the phone talking about motorbikes. I was not here for his childhood at all. I was on tour, and my childhood was something else. If I don't give him attention from 0 to 5, then I'm damned well going to have to give it from 16 to 20. They're going to get that attention somehow.
he would know.
He'd know from himself. He's learning
Yeah,
from the mistakes he made with Julian. And
yes.
he gave him the last 5 years of his life. He gave him 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, he definitely turned it around in those years. He, obviously went on vacations with Sean and Julian, and there are lots of pictures that I love when they pop up, of the three of them hanging
Yeah.
out. That was when John started wearing a wedding ring, which is very simple but very telling for that
Hmm.
portion of his life.
Beyond that, he really did want to find himself. If rock and roll didn't make him happy anymore, what was it going to be? Who was he? What was he? In 1979, Yoko actually urged John to take a solo trip to Singapore and Hong Kong to reconnect with himself. The way she nurtured him was the way he needed to be nurtured. She let him be on his own when he needed to. She encouraged that, and she let him discover his true self.
Right. And, thinking about the whole thing of like abandoning rock and roll to focus on himself, some could argue that his varying amounts of success in the 70s leading up to these years might contribute to it, but we'll leave that alone for a minute. But I think the way, like you said, the way she nurtured him, the way she encouraged him, even with like the long weekend, to sort of like spend time with himself instead of burying himself and hiding from himself, whether it be in rock and roll or women or her or whatever. It's like, I don't think he would have been enabled to really get to know himself if it hadn't been for Yoko being like, no, you can take time off from rock and roll. You can go to Bermuda. You can do all this stuff. It's important for John to know John.
Yeah, his whole life was about knowing John. I think that's why he connects with so many people, despite he did some kind of unsavory things when he was younger that a lot of people don't get away with. But I think in a way we forgive that because we relate to him just being so lost and this journey of trying to find who you are. And he tried basically everything under the sun to try and figure it out. And
Right.
toward the end of his life, I think that this hiatus that he took from music, this solitude that Yoko allowed him to have in this travel, he at one point he said, "I've been under contract since I was 22, and I was always supposed to. I was always supposed to write 100 songs by Friday, supposed to have a single out by Saturday. It dawned on me that the reason I became an artist was freedom, because I couldn't fit into the classroom, the college, the society. I know freedom is in the mind, but I couldn't clear my mind, so it was time to regroup." And that's a very mature thought, I think, in somebody's self realization journey, that freedom really is in the mind.
Definitely. And he, again, like had said, being under those contracts and being supposed to, it felt like prison. And I can imagine that. Like that's a lot of pressure, especially when you're that age. And, as we know, Erica, getting older, I just had kind of a big birthday ish, but the great thing about getting older is you have that perspective. And you're sort of like, if you don't want to do something, you're kind of like, nah, I don't really want to do that thing. So I think that also, just sort of the benefit of time and age, allowed him to have a little bit more agency when it came to himself.
Yeah, and he knew that it wasn't external, that he wasn't
Yeah,
he couldn't find that freedom in rock and roll or in women or in drugs. He had to find
yeah.
it in himself. And it sounds like he did. At one point he had said about this Singapore and Hong Kong trip, he said, "I'm looking out over the Hong Kong Bay and there's something ringing a bell. It's like, what is it?" And then I just got very, very relaxed. And it was like a recognition. This is me. This relaxed person is me. I remember this guy from way back. I know who I am. It doesn't rely on any outside agency or adulation or achievement or hit record. It's absolutely irrelevant whether the teacher loves me, hates me. I'm still me. He knows how to do things. He knows how to get around. Wow. So I called Yoko and I said, "It's me."
I love that. Oh, I want that. I don't think I've reached that part of self enlightenment quite yet, but I'm glad that John got there.
Well, you have to go through the John Lennon program. So if you've done the drugs and the sex and the music, like I just make sure you're
Oh,
through
damn.
all of the
Okay,
steps. Yeah.
I'm working on it, Erica. I'm working on it. I'll let you know how it goes.
I can't wait to hear.
Yeah, yeah. If you've done the John Lennon self realization program, let us know. We're going to trademark that so nobody steal it. Thanks.
Yeah, this is now a life coaching program based on the John Lennon method.
I think we just found our niche. By the way, we're
Oh,
going to just
yeah.
be motivational. We're going to be the Tony Robbins of the John Lennon self realization program.
Oh my God.
Uh, First step is meet us in Bermuda. We're going to be on a boat for quite a while.
Oh, I'm excited about this.
This is great. I'm gonna book a flight.
And the last thing that I want to bring up about John and his
Of
hiatus,
course you
which I
do.
think
Of
is
course you want
very.
to talk about this.
I have to talk about this. I have to talk about this.
We can't get through even a John talk without talking about Paul.
No,
Anyway,
we cannot and we will not. I think part of his self realization journey manifested in the way he saw Paul at this time. I mean, if you think about it, one of the main inspirations for John to get back into music after doing all of these journeys of self discovery, both literal and figuratively, was hearing Paul's song Coming Up. And so, maybe some time away gave him that distance that he needed for some new perspective on his relationship with Paul, his old partner, their partnership, what they did, and put the past arguments of especially the late 60s, early 70s behind him and really see what it was that they had and they did. And just honestly say, wow, that totally turned me on and I'm going to write again.
I mean that's what two of us is about, right?
Well, I live my life based on Beatles biopics, so yes.
We have to go deep into two of us at some point because yeah, I mean I'd love to think that they got stoned and danced in the park to Shaboom. That would be great.
Let us know if you want us to do a movie series.
I would love that. I love Beatles biopics. I could talk about them all day long. Yeah, let us know. Add us and let us know. But to wrap up this John's hiatus topic, I love this quote, and this is from the same John and Yoko Playboy interview. This is why on why he decided to return to public life after his hiatus. He said, "You breathe in and you breathe out. We feel like doing it, and we have something to say," which I think works for us too. We
I think
breathe
so
in, we breathe
too.
out. We feel like doing it and we have something to say.
And we think we have something to say again, so we are
Yeah.
back.
Well, we're happy to be back. Thanks for listening to Because the Beatles. And as we always say, subscribe on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're listening right now, and give us a rating/review so other Beatlemaniacs can find us.
And follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, especially if you're a new Beatles podcast. We want to know about everyone out there.
I want to see those notifications coming in, guys.
Yes,
Come on.
keep them coming. We'll be posting photos and more from this episode and beyond. Remember, you can always email us at bcthebeatles@gmail.com. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.